Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. This video is on the topic of UFOs and the Bible, chariots of God, and the fallen angels. Now I want to talk about something interesting that I noticed in the Bible, and this is part of something I talk about in my book also, which I'm still working on. It's still probably going to be a while before it's released, but I want to make these videos so that some of the content gets out there. But I ran it by a few people because I thought it was very strange that something like this would be in there. Now, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I've tried to learn a little bit of Hebrew where I can, just online and everything else. And because of that, some of this can be a little bit sensational, I must admit. But I do think there is something to it. Now, the word chariot in the Bible has a few different translations. One of them is Merkabah. And if you look up Merkabah, it's used for chariots many times, but there is definitely sort of a supernatural connotation of the word. Many people who hold on to mysticism, especially Judaic mysticism or Kabbalah, even pre-Kabbalah, would suggest that what Ezekiel saw in his vision was a Merkabah. And basically, according to their beliefs, which can be found in the Hekkelot, discovered by scholar Gershom Scholem, written in the late Hellenistic period, in a period that followed the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. And basically through this teaching, which is pre-Kabbalah Jewish mysticism, it taught that the Merkabah was this idea of a vessel to God, a vessel that would take you on a journey to God, or a vessel for a man to bring divine powers down to earth. So it definitely was a movement that occurred out of priestly mysticism, and there's some evidence of a lot of these writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there are some different implications for the Merkabah, and there's been a lot of esoteric teachings on it. But that's not what I want to talk about really in this video. I want to talk about another translation for the word chariot that is found in the Bible in particular passages that I want to point out. Now, this translation of chariots in the Hebrew is chariotry, chariot, or millstone. And I'm going to talk about that millstone aspect of it, which I find fascinating. Now, if you go to 2 Kings 6:17, this is when Elisha prayed to the Lord that the servant who woke up and saw that they were surrounded by an army of the Arameans to be able to see that they were under the supernatural protection of God. And if you look at verse 17, it says this, "And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha." Now, the chariots of fire, these are obviously God's chariots. But again, it makes me wonder because one of the translations is millstone. Now, before I get too far into this, let me show you a couple pictures of a millstone. Here they are. Look like something familiar that we talk about? Now, it's interesting because a lot of times what I have said in the past is that all UFOs are demons. And while I'm not moving off that position, I am expanding upon it. And there are some nuances. And that is that I believe UFO craft that people are seeing fall into 4 categories. First, you have government craft. In my opinion, I think that the shadow government, the breakaway civilization, if you will, have been developing anti-gravity aircraft for the better part of half a century, probably longer, and I think they have some craft that resemble these disc-shaped objects. But that doesn't explain the fact that these things have been seen for centuries. For example, according to some reports, in 329 BC, Alexander the Great recorded 2 great flying shields. And while the story is perpetuated by a lot of UFO enthusiasts, there isn't really a good source for it, but it is an interesting thing to consider that if he saw a couple flying shields, what could they be? There are also interesting reports from old Egyptian papyri, parts of the Annals of Thutmose III, who reigned around 1504 to 1450 BC. It reports of seeing a circle of fire that was coming in the sky. And there are countless reports throughout the centuries of people seeing things in the sky that could be translated into what we in modern day consider the flying saucer or some sort of UFO. So getting back to the list, 1 is government craft, and 2 and 3 are 2 being fallen angels, as presented in Age of Deceit, Fallen Angels, and the New World Order. But then 3 is God's chariots. And we'll get into that in a second here with the whole idea of the millstone. And 4 is some sort of explainable phenomenon, whether it's a satellite, a planet, swamp gas, all the excuses you hear from people trying to explain away the sightings. So that's number 4. But getting back to this idea of the millstone in the Bible, the reason why we know that this isn't just imagery of some sort is because earlier in 2 Kings 2, verse 11, we read about Elijah, which, came before Elisha. And if we read it happen there, it's pretty spectacular. It says, "And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven." Now, I happen to think that this is some sort of extra-dimensional portal that the whirlwind is. Maybe not so much like a vertical one, but a horizontal one. And, maybe it appears to look like, what we've seen with maybe something like the Norway Spiral. I'm not saying the Norway Spiral was a portal, but I'm saying it might have looked something like that. But again, this idea of chariots of fire and horses of fire is mentioned. And so we know that it is supernatural in origin. And here the same word, rekeb, is used, the one that can be translated also millstone. But there's even more here. In Psalm 68:17, it says this, "The chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. The Lord is among them, as in Sinai in the holy place." Now, another translation in the ESV reads, "The chariots of God are twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now the sanctuary." And if you read the surrounding verses, let me read for you from verse 15 through 18 in the ESV version. "O mountain of God, mountain of Bashan, O many peaked mountains, mountain of Bashan, why do you look with hatred, O many peaked mountain, at the mount that God desired for his abode? Yes, where the Lord will dwell forever. The chariots of God are twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. You ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train and receiving gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there." So again, it's very interesting to consider that there are chariots of God twice 10,000, thousands upon thousand. Twice 10,000, that's 20,000 chariots of God. Now, I'm not saying we should believe everything we see and hear, especially from NASA, but there are some very interesting pieces of footage, especially from the STS-75, where a large tether, which was supposed to be miles long, broke off and flew out into space. And here's the clip of STS-75 looking at that tether. Check it out.
Well, the long line is a tether, and there's a little bit of debris that kind of flies with us, and it's illuminated by the sun at such low angle. So there's a lot of stray light, and it's getting washed out quickly, but Claude is trying to do a quick, good job here adjusting the cameras.
Now, these could just be space debris and nothing more, but I think it's fascinating that there is this footage from outer space, the STS-75, where you see disc-shaped objects with a hole in the middle, kind of like a millstone, fly past this thing. Now, this thing is supposed to be miles and miles long, and so when you see this huge object float through here, it makes me wonder. And I'm not saying that these are God's chariots. I'm not saying that they are fallen angels. I'm not even saying that they're UFOs necessarily. Well, they are UFOs. They're unidentified flying objects in space. But I'm not saying that they're flying saucers or intelligent objects or whatever. But I mean, short of being debris or, maybe there's Pac-Man in outer space or something, there's something to this. And it's just curious that in the Bible, there is reference to 10,000, 20,000 chariots of God. And that word chariots can be translated into millstone. And there's this footage from NASA that allegedly has these weird objects flying through space that look like millstone. So again, I'm not trying to come to any hard conclusions here. I'm just throwing it out there as food for thought and something to consider. And if you keep watching here, I mean, look at how many there are. There's a whole bunch of these things floating around out there. And some of them change directions and stuff. And that's when you know it's not just debris moving through space. So just some interesting things going on here. I'm going to let the clip play here in the background a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and read Zechariah 6, 1 through 8, because there's some interesting things that are mentioned there as well. And I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, there came 4 chariots out from between 2 mountains. And the mountains were mountains of brass. In the first chariot were red horses, and in the second chariot black horses, and in the third chariot white horses, and in the fourth chariot grizzled and bay horses. Then I answered and said unto the angel that talked with me, What are these, my lord? And the angel answered and said to me, These are the 4 spirits of heaven, which go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. The black horses which are therein go forth into the north country, and the white go forth after them, and the grizzled go forth towards the south country. And the bay went forth and sought to go, that they might walk to and fro through the earth. And he said, Get you hence, walk to and fro through the earth. So they walked to and fro through the earth. Then cried he upon me, and spake unto me, saying, Behold, these that go toward the north country have quieted my spirit in the north country. So your initial reaction might be, oh, are these the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the revealing of Jesus Christ, of the first 4 seals in the book of Revelation? No, they are not. Because if you notice and read carefully, these horses were inside the chariots. And we know that these horses are the spirits of God, as the angel tells Zechariah, the prophet. So what we're looking at here is literally the spirits of God being explained as horses, which makes sense if we go back to the last passage and see how there were horses and chariots of fire, that these are the 4 spirits of heaven. So again, there's this supernatural element that they are of God, not just fallen angels. But of course, there are reports of the quote-unquote bad guys and some really nasty bad guys. If you look at Joel 2, in the Joel 2 army, verses 4 and 5, it says this, The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen, so they shall run. Like the noise of chariots. And interestingly, this version of chariots is Merkabah. It's not Rekeb, it's Merkabah that we started the conversation with. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array. So these chariots, or these war horses, if you will, jump from the mountaintops. Okay, whatever's doing that, not cool. And if you keep reading, these aren't necessarily the good guys. This is the army of locusts that we read about in the book of Revelation. So, you know, they could be hybrids of some kind or something even stranger and more freaky. And we know that Satan doesn't have anything new. And anything he uses as a counterfeit to God. He can't create anything new. And so this is why I think he and his fallen angels have been in the ear of these inventors and people, at least in the last 100 years, trying to get them to build the technology so that they can possess it, so the demons can possess it, and they can open, and again, you know, things like CERN that we've talked about, they can open portals so they can come through in some fashion. But the last thing I want to look at here is the Ephah. In Zechariah 5, verses 5 through 8, there's a very interesting passage. And some of you might go to Zechariah 5 and say, what about the flying scroll? But I think the flying scroll, while it's still pretty big, is an interesting thing to consider. I don't think it was necessarily a UFO. Now, you've heard cigar-shaped UFOs and stuff like that. But if you look at the dimensions of the flying scroll, translated into feet, is 20 cubits long, 10 cubits wide. It's 30 feet in length and 15 feet in width. So pretty big, I would say. I guess potentially it's some sort of, you know, you can call it a UFO or a cigar-shaped UFO. And I'm open to the possibility, but I think a flying scroll is a flying scroll. But let me get back to the Ephah here. Now, the Ephah, we read Zechariah 5, 5 through 8. Here's what it says. Then the angel that talked with me went forth and said unto me, Lift up now thine eyes and see what is this that goeth forth. And I said, What is it? And he said, This is an Ephah that goeth forth. He said, moreover, this is their resemblance through all the earth. And behold, there was lifted up a talent of lead, and this is a woman that sitteth in the midst of the ephah. And he said, this is wickedness. And he cast it into the midst of the ephah, and he cast the weight of lead upon the mouth thereof. Now here is an image of the ephah. What does that look like to you? So here we have another object that looks kind of like a disc-shaped UFO, and that this is their resemblance through the earth. This is what it looks like through the earth, and there is a woman inside who is wickedness. This is wickedness. So again, very interesting stuff in the Bible concerning UFOs, and I'll share with you one last thing that I find fascinating, and that comes in judgment of Babylon. So if we go to Revelation chapter 18, verse 21, and then later it's mentioned again in 22, but verse 21 is the main one here. And I'm going to read 21 and 22. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. Verse 22, and the voice of harpers and musicians and of the pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be, shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. So, isn't it interesting that a mighty angel here to judge and put an end to Mystery Babylon picks up a mighty stone that's like a great millstone and casts it into the sea? Could this be some kind of mothership going on? And of course, there's this image out there. Again, I don't know if this is real or not. I'm just sharing interesting things that the UFO and alien people talk about. There is supposedly an image that was released by the Brasilia Planetarium that shows this ridiculously huge 3,000-mile craft from the ISS, the International Space Station. Now, again, I don't know if this is real, but if it is, whoa, there's your thing that looks like a millstone. Could it be some kind of mothership that's being stored or hiding somewhere in our atmosphere over the oceans? And could it be that the thing gets cast down into the sea as part of the judgment of Mystery Babylon? So these are just some thoughts I wanted to share, because a lot of people have asked me questions about UFOs and the Bible, and I presented my theory in Age of Deceit, Fallen Angels, and the New World Order, but we're going on 4 years almost since that movie was published. And since then, again, I've increased in the nuances, I think, of my view. I'm not moving away from the view that they are fallen angels appearing, and I still think that's what's going on for the most part. But there is that possibility, based on biblical teaching, that God's angels somehow come through and his chariots of fire, or the chariots of God, do appear, and they may look like a millstone, a disc-shaped object that's in the sky or comes through some sort of dimensional portal, as Elijah the prophet was taken up in. So I think there's some interesting things going on here, and I think this is why when Jesus returns, we're going to know. We're going to absolutely know when he comes back. And, this is what makes all this sort of Project Bluebeam talk really interesting as well, because if the Antichrist will present himself as the Jewish Messiah, as we've been talking about in some of these other videos, he will undoubtedly need to create some sort of appearance. And what's more dramatic than coming through some kind of alleged fake portal that's in the sky that was created through CERN or something? Again, that's just all speculation. I'm just having fun with that. But it does speak into this idea that, again, the UFO phenomenon currently, I believe, are either fallen angels, which are manifesting since they are interdimensional beings, government craft, I think a lot of them are government craft, or leave some room for the possibility that they are God's angels or the chariots of fire. And I think there's a reason why. In 1 John 4:1, it says, don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits. It doesn't say every spirit is evil. It says test the spirits. If they testify that Jesus came in the flesh, then he can be trusted. The spirit can be trusted. So there's good spirits that come forth, so we can't just dismiss everything. And so 1 John 4:1 speaks into that. Believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, or test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. And there you go. That means there are actual prophets. That means there are actually good spirits out there. But if you don't test them and you don't find out, if they don't preach that Jesus Christ came in the flesh, then you can't trust that spirit. All right. So that's something that I wanted to share with you guys. Hopefully you guys get something out of this. Again, thanks for watching this video. Please comment, be nice in the comment section, but go ahead and comment. Please share this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will talk to you guys soon. God bless.